Welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. I'm your host, Daniel, and today we will be reviewing The Menu. The Menu came out a few years ago, 2022, I believe. It starred Ralph Fiennes, Anya Taylor-Joy, and was directed by Mark Mylod, who had worked mostly as a TV director, I think, before this, working on shows like Game of Thrones and Succession. And Succession in particular, it has Mark Mylod, it has some of the same producers, I think a couple of the same writers, perhaps. So there's definitely some crossover between the creative team behind Succession and the creative team behind this movie. And I think if you enjoyed Succession, you'll probably enjoy this. The Menu is advertised as kind of a horror comedy, and I can see it. There are definitely some horror elements to it, but I think it's more of a dark comedy and very much a satire that has to deal a lot about classism. So what this movie is basically about is this young couple, Tyler and Margot, played by Nick Holt and Anya Taylor-Joy, show up to go to this super fancy restaurant that's on an island just off the coast. And it's one of those places where it's like over $1,000 a head. They only serve up to a dozen people a night. It's very, very exclusive. And it's run by Chef Slowick, played by Ralph Fiennes, who's kind of a Gordon Ramsay type, kind of a very globally famous celebrity chef who's done a lot of shows and is now at like the top of the industry. And with them is a small group that's exactly the kind of people you would be expecting to come here. There's a washed-up celebrity who may or may not be friends with Slowick and dragging along his assistant who's like actively trying to leave home. There's a snobby food critic and her own sycophant assistant. There's a few Wall Street bros who are like in business with the owner of the island. There's this old couple who's come repeatedly. And then from our young couple, Tyler is a total foodie. He is obsessed. He is a geek about everything foodie. And about Slowick in particular, he just kind of seems to worship the man. He views him almost as a kind of god. And then Anya Taylor-Joy's Margot is kind of the only person who doesn't really seem super into this. And I'm going to try to keep this review pretty spoiler-free up to a point. But right away, there's just this very much a vibe that she doesn't quite belong here and that she's hiding something. And honestly, from the second they take off to the island, it all feels a little ominous. The boat drops them off on an island and then the boat leaves, so they're here and they tour the island. They see where the staff lives, which is kind of shocking. They live in basically this military style housing with just a bunch of these open bunks, no separation between them. Even the toilets are just there in plain view in this co-ed bunk, and that's how the chefs live. And when someone reasonably brings up the question of, do you guys ever get burnt out, Elsa, who is played by Hong Chau, and is maybe my favorite character in this. She's like the head assistant to the chef. She is hilarious and terrifying in equal measure, gets some of the best lines, and steals pretty much every moment of screen time she has. But when one of the people asks her, kind of reasonably, does the staff get burnt out, she doesn't even understand the concept of it. And you get the vibe very quickly that this feels almost more like a cult than a true restaurant. A lot of people were talking about this movie giving Midsummer vibes early on, and I can definitely see it. And then they get to the restaurant and the meal starts, and it seems very normal at first, but with each passing course, things get a little more hostile, a little more passive-aggressive, a little more something's going on here. And then they get to, I believe, the fourth course called The Mess. And I won't go into any details about it yet, but The Mess is a beautiful, haunting, sad scene where the movie really shows its teeth and we understand what kind of ride we are in for the rest of this film. And so what we are left with is a movie that is very sharp, very smart, very funny, has kind of a almost dark fairy tale vibe to it. In a lot of ways, these characters are all sort of caricatures in a sense, but they're well realized enough to make it work and accept it. And there's a very clear message the movie's kind of trying to give about classism, about diving into the arts, and about the kind of toxic relationship that can come between people who create art and people who consume it, especially when it starts being done at a very high class level. And there's really not much more I think I can say about this movie without going into spoilers about it. It's a wonderful, twisty ride that I think most people will enjoy. I definitely recommend it. Now to get into a little more spoilers for two of my favorite elements of this movie. The first, like I said, the mess. That scene is where this movie really turns. And so basically what happens is Slowick gets one of his sous chefs from the kitchen to step up, talk about how he wrote this letter when he was very young, wanting to be part of it, and how he's good, he's very, very good, but he will never be great. He will never be in the position that Slowick himself is in. And then he asks this young chef very pointedly, do you want my life? Not my achievements, not my fame, not my talent, my life. To which he tearfully responds, no, chef, and then blows his brains out. And people start freaking out, trying to figure out if it's real, if it's not real, is it just theater? It's very, very real. And this scene kind of starts getting into one of the big themes and points of this movie, which is the dark side of chasing your dream. And I think there's just something very kind of pointed and haunting about that question, do you want my life? Not my achievements, not my talent, not my riches, but my life. Because I think so often in America, we are so obsessed with achievement and accomplishment and material gain and fame and status that we look at the people who achieve those things and we idolize them. But I don't think a lot of us would really truly want to be them. Let's look at The Rock, for example. The Rock was a highly charismatic wrestler who was able to turn that into being a movie star and became one of the biggest, most successful movie stars on the face of the planet. But have you ever heard him actually talk about his day-to-day life? Have you ever heard him talk about his routine? The man gets up at like 5 in the morning every single day, spends hours in the gym, monitors what he eats like a hawk, and he's always on the go. He's always flying around the world to somewhere, or he's going to some new shoot, he's going to some new interview, he's going to some new something, driving, flying, constantly on the move. I wouldn't want to live that way. Would I like to have one of The Rock's mansions? Would I like to have some of his money? Sure, but I would not want to live the way The Rock lives. And you can apply that to almost any successful athlete, movie star, musician, artist, stand-up comedian, whatever. Almost anyone who's highly, highly successful does it at a great and terrible cost to their personal life. And I question if that cost is really, really worth it. We have so many movies asking that question, and yet people keep choosing to chase that dragon, whether it's worth it or not. And then as far as Margot and Tyler goes, it's really fascinating once we find out what's going on. So basically, Tyler is an obsessed fan of Slowick, who was desperate to get here, has been trying to get to this restaurant for years, it sounds like. And he was finally able to make contact with Slowick and come, knowing full well what was going to happen at this restaurant, knowing full well that everyone in this restaurant was going to be killed, knowing full well he'd be giving up his own life and the life of his date. But then his girlfriend broke up with him, and so he hired Margot, this sex worker, this escort, to come with him, knowing full well that she would die also, because that's just how badly he wanted to experience Slowick's presence just once, to eat at his restaurant just once. That he was not only willing to let himself die, he was willing to kill an innocent stranger as well. And then as for Margot, she's fascinating because she's kind of the one person here who is not impressed with all of these trappings. She's just kind of along for the ride because she's literally being paid for it. And there's just this tension between her and Elsa and Slowick from the get-go as she's just out of place and is kind of ruining this elaborate night of vengeance that Slowick has had planned because she doesn't fit in. She's not one of these rich people who has in some way contributed to the ruin of his art, as he puts it. To the point where I'm going to simplify a lot of things here. You should still see the movie yourself. But she eventually kind of joins the staff, and in the process of joining the staff, ends up getting access to Slowick's personal cabin, where she sees some very interesting pictures of him. We see a picture of a much younger version of him with a beautiful wife and a child who we never see again or never referenced again. We also see a picture of a very young Slowick, like high school age Slowick. It's an Employee of the Month award of him just making this cheeseburger at some old greasy cheeseburger hut, and that was the start of his journey. And just the huge smile he has on his face, the absolute joy, is such a contrast from this military-style chef that we've seen the whole movie, who's cooking with an obsessive passion, but not with love. And that is how Margot gets out of it. She calls him out on this fact. She calls out that his food, that every dish he has served is just this elaborate mind game. None of it's actually enjoyable food, and that she's still hungry. And then she asks for a cheeseburger. And immediately, it's such a wonderful bit of acting by Ralph Fiennes. Immediately, you just see this kind of spark light up behind his eyes. And you see his whole tone and body language just shift a little bit. And then as he goes along making this cheeseburger, we just see this old smile kind of sink in. And we see that he's actually doing something that he loves again. Something that he used to love, but has long since lost any desire for. He serves it to her. She takes a bite. It's delicious. Of course it is. Then she says, my eyes are bigger than my stomach. Can I get this to go? Puts it all in a doggy bag for her, and he lets her go. And there is a bit of a theory about this ending that it's actually a fake out. Because earlier in the movie, they toured the smokehouse where they're smoking and aging all the meats. And Elsa explained that the beef needs to be aged to this very particular day, or else it won't be good anymore. It'll, in fact, kill anyone who eats it a day longer than that. And so there's a theory that there is this old beef that was laying around that they used to make her burger, and that as soon as the credits roll, she'll die from poisoning. But I don't prescribe to that theory for a couple reasons. First off, just by the movie's own kind of internal logic, this has all been meticulously planned and set up. And poisoned beef was not a part of any of the dishes of the menu. So why would they have that old expired beef on hand? There's absolutely no reason they would have it on hand in the first place. And then more importantly, I think it just really undercuts the beauty of the ending. It takes a very poignant ending in which this man who lost the love for what he used to do and became a monster in the first place got one reprieve, got one reminder of his humanity, and let the person who gave him that go out of mercy. I just think that's such a more powerful, beautiful ending, but you do you. The theory exists. You can run with it if you want. And there is such a fascinating message, I think, in this movie, where we're always told, chase your dreams, and if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But that's not always necessarily true. I think there is a real danger in taking a hobby, and taking a passion, and taking something that you just love doing, into turning it into something that you have to work on hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Often for people who don't even really understand or appreciate what you're doing in the first place. It's definitely a way you could take what you love most in this world and turn it into something you hate. It's a big part of the reason why I've held off on doing YouTube for so long, quite frankly. I love watching movies, I love watching TV shows, and I don't want to turn that into something that I hate, something that I feel like I have to do that I don't enjoy doing anymore. At this point, I am who I am. I'm going to be watching movies and shows and geeking out on them, regardless of whether I have someone to share them with or not, so I think I'll be okay. But it is a risk. It's a very real risk. So what we have is a wonderful movie that's very smart, very well put together, wonderful cast across the board, that has a lot to say about class, that has a lot to say about art, about the kind of inherently toxic relationship that there can be between an artist and their patrons. And it, other than like one COVID reference, there's nothing else about this movie that's dated at all. It's as relevant today as it was back then. It's both of its time and yet very timeless. It's a great movie that I highly recommend. So that's a review today. If you've sat through the whole thing, I truly thank you for giving me the time. Friendly reminder that a like and subscribe can really help this channel grow. Anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Until then, stay sane, stay human.